Hi BookTube, and welcome to another fiction review. The New York Times Book Review called today's novel exceedingly vast. And yet at the same time, the Los Angeles Times Review praised the author for their excellence in small things. Now, I think both reviewers are correct without contradicting each other. Today, we are reviewing The Unpassing by Chia Chia Lin, published in 2019, 280 pages. This is such a difficult novel to summarize without stripping it of much of what makes it powerful. If I just give you the stripped down summary, I could say, okay, this is the story of a Taiwanese family who emigrate to the United States in the 1980s, and they end up living in an isolated property 30 miles from Anchorage, Alaska. But I like the really powerful summary by Wendy Cheng, the Associate Professor of American Studies at Scripps College. She says this book is about the way the kids make meaning, the kids in this family, how they make meaning through love and fear of the landscape. They know they will never belong, and yet they yearn for it, and they strive to make new worlds and find the homes they lost before they could speak or really remember. And you might not remember this book. I did mention it. Oh, it was way back on, I think in a tag video, when I had to choose books, and I can't even remember why or how I needed to do the choosing, but I ended up deciding that I was going to choose from a list of books that had 2-word titles, and the first word had to be the. And so I got a huge list online. I can't remember the website. If I can find it, I'll put it in the description box. And when I came to this title, The Unpassing, I thought, okay, that isn't a word, and so I am now really curious. This word has been created for this book. And to me, I thought, oh, that shows a lot of thought on the author's part. And so, just this last month, I decided that I needed to read it. It kept attracting me. As you get to know more about the author and what they're trying to do with the book, you will probably understand why I was so drawn to it. So let's meet our author. Chia Chia Lin was born in Boston. I do not know when. You can go visit her website. You will not find a birth date there, but you will find that she has a Bachelor of Arts from Harvard University, and she then went on to get her MFA in fiction from the Iowa Writers Workshop. And The Unpassing was her debut novel that came out in 2019. I will also have a link in my description box to a website that shows some of the short fiction and essays that she's had published in various periodicals, Paris Review, New York Times, etc. The Unpassing won the 2020 Clark Fiction Prize. And when Chia Chia Lin was interviewed in May 2019, she described herself as notoriously secretive about everything. And she admitted that she didn't even want her parents to read The Unpassing, although she was coming to terms with the possibility that now that it was published and out in the wider world, that they might, in fact, read it. There will be a link to that interview as well in the description box. And she also said, and I'm quoting now, "I'm working on a new project, but it's at such an early, still percolating stage that I think it would fall apart if I tried to talk about it. I'll say it's really different from this book. I suppose every writer thinks that, but it is. The structure of this book, its setting. I've said Alaska, about 30 miles outside of Anchorage, in a piece of land that had been set aside for a new residential subdevelopment just after the Second World War. But only a couple of houses got built, and then it just kind of got left. And so that house is not in the greatest shape, and you'll see that very shortly. The narrator doesn't give us a date, but it's very easy to date this novel. During the first 6 years of the 1980s, there was a noticeable number of children who were infected with bacterial meningitis, with higher infection rates among indigenous children. The cause was found to be poor water quality. Now, some of these infections are key events in the novel. And also, not long after the novel opens, our narrator, who is a young boy, watches the news headlines and the top story is the Challenger disaster. So we know the narration begins somewhere close to January 1986. And for most of the novel, you are covering that year. And then towards the end, the narrator does skip ahead a few years to let you know how things happened and carried on later when he became an adult. The novel is written in first person, and our narrator is just 10 years old. One of his names is Gavin. It's the only name that the reader gets to know, and then we only hear it 3 times mentioned in the text, usually because other people have directly asked the narrator for his name, or his name is said by another character. Gavin is the second child in this family that we're going to meet. He has an older sister, Pepe, also known as Paige, who is possibly 14 or 15, and then younger twins who are 5 years old. Gavin's mother and father grew up in different parts of Taiwan. His father lived just a half-hour's train journey from Taipei, and so in a landlocked area, whereas his mother came from the very south of the island, from a fishing village on the coast. Sometime after Gavin's parents marry, his father makes the decision that he wants to come to the United States. Now, the only reason we are given for that decision is a story that the mother tells the children, so I don't know how reliable it is, but she says that their father loved to read copies of Time magazine from the Taipei library, but every copy was censored by the Kuomintang regime. And sometimes that meant that whole pages or part pages were cut out before the issue was made available to the public. And so the mother tells the children that Gavin's father came to the United States so that he could read full issues of Time magazine. But it's not clear why the family ended up in Alaska. We learn via Gavin that initially the family went to Michigan, and the father had a job there for about 4 months, and then he lost that job, and we don't know why. There's a lot of things in the book that are just, you have a 10-year-old's understanding of what's really going on. Let me read you this short passage describing the house and the property that Gavin's family lives in. 30 miles outside of Anchorage, our small house sat by itself at the end of a short gravel road. It faced several acres of half-cleared land. To the back and sides were spruce woods that had lived through world wars, the gold rush, homesteading. But in a country where we had no ancestors, in a state only 20-some years old, the past felt irrelevant to us. Only later would I realize that even our house harbored its own history. There were figure-8 gouges on the kitchen floor, where furniture had rolled like marbles during the big quake. Mushrooms sprouted in our bathroom with the seasons, tracking time. They grew from the seam between the floor and the wall, and the caps were perfect and unblemished, curving over their stems like modest skirts. The house had been built on the tail end of the World War II boom, part of a subdivision that had never materialized. Wanting nothing to do with it all, the chimney detached itself and crumbled. The wall was patched using cement instead of plaster, so that even after it was painted over, there appeared a permanent textured shadow, the ghost of the old fireplace. In the wood stove, there was a thick layer of ancient soot. The book has only a small number of characters, and most of those, of course, are Gavin's immediate family. In total, there's maybe 9 principal people. Other characters, well, they have walk-on parts, a teacher, a work colleague, a stranger who happens to start conversation. It's a lonely existence. And when there are tensions within the family, or they have a need that they can't fill, the outside world seems far, far away, just like Gavin's maternal grandparents, that they telephone once a month. And the isolation and loneliness is exacerbated by how little the characters move around and can move around. Gavin's father, who drove the decision to emigrate, reaches a point where what he experiences makes him distrust his own decision-making, and he becomes gradually more passive, more withdrawn, and that has a knock-on effect on the rest of the family. It traps them in a desperate situation, which the reader is going to understand better than the narrator, and they're going to fear for those children. And that leads us perfectly into the problematic content, because I think for all readers, the toughest part of this book is going to be the suffering of children. Let me read the first page. I did that first out of pure curiosity, and when I did it, I found the passage so powerful that I knew I would have to read the rest of the novel. During an uneventful part of my childhood, my mother walked into the room with a plate of loose, washed grapes. She collapsed. Grapes thudded dully on the carpet. One rolled under the couch. The plate lay overturned, and my mother's body was beside it, limbs splayed. My sister Pepe and I remained very still. "Don't cry," she whispered to me, but she was the one who was starting to cry. Her bottom lip hung open, and her halting breath slid out. Sunlight glossed the spread of my mother's hair. I saw veins of red in all that black. I felt a compression of everything I knew to one hard nut. Things ended. You couldn't stop things from ending. My mother's back twitched. Her limbs reordered themselves. She sat up. "I was testing you," she said. She was angry. She clawed at the grapes on the carpet, collecting them to be washed again. "Why were you just sitting there? Why didn't you call for the ambulance?" Neither Pepe nor I could say a word. "You didn't do anything." As my mother rose from the floor on a swell of indignation, the plate she held tipped forward and back, and grapes rolled right up to the precipice. "What kind of children have I raised? Tell me, do you want to be orphans?" I wish I'd never felt it. That relief, that total unburdening. My mother had wanted to teach us a lesson. What I'd learned was reversal. Things that had been splintered could be intact again. Not long after, when we faced events that caused us sorrow, I yearned for that same erasure. Undo this. But although we tried, each in our own way, no one was able to go back even one step. I imagine that passage is either going to draw you the way it drew me, or you're going to go, "I'm sorry, I can't do this book right now." And for the rabbit hole portion of this review, I want to talk about that unusual title, The Unpassing. I'm quoting now from a 2020 interview with Chia Chia Lin, where she says, "The Unpassing is a novel about a single family, and I'm wary of attempts to attribute various character traits to larger statements about race and culture. It's something that non-minority writers don't have to deal with. Their characters can simply be allowed to exist as individuals rather than portraits of a culture or either a confirmation or rejection of stereotypes." Now, what I think the book does diagram is the disconnection which can be created by emigration in the 20th century, because it ends a kind of belonging which a person would have if they stayed in the place where they were born and grew up. While at the same time, you see, they can't always count on the same quality of belonging in the place that they resettle, nor can they count on regaining their belonging should they return to the place they originally grew up. You end up with a strange situation where you don't quite belong anywhere. And that, I think, is one of the meanings of the title. The unpassing means not able to pass as a native, and therefore not able to belong. Gavin observes his otherness while he's in Alaska. There's a white stranger who comes up and starts a conversation, asks Gavin what his name is, and of course Gavin politely replies, Gavin, to which the stranger replies, how do you spell that in English? And even when Gavin is older, much older, and he's living in Seattle, Washington, there's still this uneasiness, and I'm quoting from the novel now, where he says, there we were, in the Pacific Northwest, yet in a city that probably had more Alaskan transplants than any other. By many measures, we were doing better, our lives more stable and restrained, but sometimes I felt uneasy. What were we doing there? The feeling persisted through my life, no matter where I went. And when Gavin is older, and he's able to make a trip to Taiwan, to the village where his mother grew up, there he doesn't quite fit in either. The local girls, they use a Taiwanese word which means white foreigner to describe him, and he has an allergic reaction to the fish and the seafood that his aunts and uncles catch every day and eat themselves, but he doesn't do very well. He breaks out in a rash. And in my description box, there's a 2020 article by the author Wendy Cheng explaining how, in spite what the author says about not wanting her book necessarily to be interpreted in terms of the ethnic group, nevertheless, Cheng said that as a second-generation Taiwanese immigrant herself, she found the Unpassing resonated in incredible detail about exactly the kind of experience her family had. So that will be in the description box if you want to look that up. A second possible meaning of unpassing is not dying or the denial of death. And this is perhaps the greatest source of pain in this novel. It's the death of a child, and that death it's a taboo subject within the family. And the emotions which are forbidden, they poison all of the characters in so many different ways. I think that's probably the biggest impact emotionally on that whole novel. And finally, unpassing, if we think of the word pass as in pass a test, the opposite being fail, therefore unpassing is about failure to do things correctly, and the disastrous consequences of failure, of coming up short. And these are themes reflected in the family's story and in the events which affect them and which they observe happening to others also. And that's the review done. I don't know how I would sum up the book. I realize that for some people, they'll be thinking, oh my goodness, that's a lot to ask somebody to read about. But I found the book powerful and compelling. Once I started reading it, I could not stop. I finished it very, very quickly. So please check out all the links in my description box. You'll get a lot more information from the author about the process that she went through to do her research, because she spent a lot of time in Alaska. She has a couple of friends that like to go hiking and camping. And I know, I meant to put on screen, I'll do it now, a photograph. This is of the author camped out in the wilderness in Alaska, braver than I am, because I certainly couldn't do this. And she writes about how she found her anti-home when she was lost in that Alaskan wilderness. So it'd be good to read that article as well. So all kinds of resource, but I can't say anything bad about the book. I found it a really powerful reading experience. Okay, everybody, that's it. I shall be back in a few days' time because I'm getting through all these scripts I have backed up for you. And we'll have a non-fiction review, shall we? We need a bit of non-fiction now. Okay, see you soon. Hope your reading is going well. Take care. Bye-bye.